Gopal Gandhi has worn various hats and performed various roles in public life over a very distinguished career, and now is really, as I said, one of the country's foremost public intellectuals, writes extensively and really writes very beautifully, and is one of those few people who speaks as well as he writes. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Gandhi, by asking you the question that in a sense troubles me at times. The politicians that we see, and we've seen over the last day and a half, most of them seem to belong to what I call either family-based parties and therefore are dynasts, or are what is sometimes referred to as populist demagogues, people who woo people through their demagoguery, through populism. Is that specific to the South, or do you believe that is now the underlying trend of politics in the country, that to become a leading politician or a leader, you either have to have a famous surname or you have to be a populist demagogue? How do you respond?
I think both are true. We have the instance of family politics. We also have very remarkable examples of what can be called the counter-helm, the counter-family politics. And the parties which have today either themselves shown dynastic sequence are also parties which started off very differently. They started off as counter-helms. The Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam in Tamil Nadu, for instance, was completely a family. It was something to do with the personality and the program of Periyar and then of C.N. Annadurai, who had no family claims to further. It is much later that when Kalaignar Karunanidhi handed over, so to say, the baton of his party to his son, that the party began to acquire dynastic features. So I would say both are true. In Tamil Nadu, the AIADMK was not a family party at all. It has a very different antecedent, and now it's likely to have an extremely different and almost unique future ahead of it. It has nothing to do with families. And I would also like to say that the states where parties have followed family dynastic patterns are also states which have rejected the family pattern. Indira Gandhi herself lost. Her son lost. Her elder son did not lose, but might have lost in the next election that he was going to contest. So the family principle is, I would say, a factor, but it is not a determining factor, and it is, I think, good that it is not a determining factor. As far as politics today is concerned, the most attractive names in political terms are of people who owe very little to families. Really, the voters don't care whether somebody is somebody's son or not. In fact, that can be a terrible liability. A son and a grandson claiming loyalty on the capital of family is a subject of some mirth and ridicule, and I think very deservedly so. The people who have really sort of stormed into political imagination, like Arvind Kejriwal, and in recent times Kanhaiya Kumar, or in Gujarat Jignesh, have nothing to claim by way of family. So we have both patterns, and I think it's good that we have both patterns. Right-wingism is about being on the side of something that already has a strong foothold. It could be a family, it could be a community. And I think in the case of right-wingers, whether it be Donald Trump in America or Narendra Modi in India, I think right-wingism is a kind of ideological equivalent of family bandism. You are not talking of a family, but you're talking of a cluster of families which are from a cluster of communities which belong to a certain creed and a certain community. And a certain, in our case, also sometimes very mistakenly, but sometimes very pointedly and politically called a race, an awful term, but that is what it is.
So essentially what you're saying then is that the future of politics or political leaders is to strongly and sharply identify yourself with identity politics. So it could be Dravida identity in the case of Tamil Nadu, it could be Hindutva identity in the case of the BJP, it could be a Bengali sense of Bengali identity in a case of a Mamata Banerjee, or an Odia identity with a Naveen Patnaik. But that those leaders who are unable to do that, and the Congress party in particular in the context of India, which at one time claimed to be this umbrella party, will struggle in this new type of politics, which more sharply and unequivocally identifies itself with particular groups and communities.
I think that is a very correct demographic approach to the situation and to the subject, Rajdeep. But I would like to say here that it is not so simple. It is not so simple for those who want to cash in on either family or community. The majority of India's votes were scattered, but the Hindu vote was consolidated. So what we are talking about is the attempt to consolidate votes in the name of family, in the name of clan, in the name of community, but that is being challenged inertly, passively by the scattered majority of India, but also I think very pointedly by people who are cutting across this. So I think there is a great hope in India for the non-cluster, the non-community and the non-feudal and therefore the non-family and therefore also the non-right-wing forces of India coming together, sometimes by design, as it happened in Delhi, I think, but sometimes also by just chance.
But the fact, Mr. Gandhi, is that across India now politicians increasingly, or maybe they always did, appeal even more directly to their caste and sectional interests. Is it possible, dare I say to you, since you have the most famous surname, the original Gandhi, as the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, would Mahatma Gandhi be comfortable with this, in this age of vote bank politics, someone appealing to caste alignment, somebody appealing to community, or would Mr. Gandhi simply say, this is not the India that I dreamt of?
I think we should give Mahatma Gandhi a little respite from involvement in Indian politics. I think he deserves a little rest from continuous engagement. And now, if we look at everything from the prism of Mahatma Gandhi's eyes or his vision, I think it would be unfair both to him and to contemporary politics. What we should definitely look for is not what would so and so have said, but what do the people of India today see? What are the options that the people of India today have? And I think the sectoral, the sectarian, the sectional appeal to the people of India in times of election and in other times is an extremely unfortunate and deleterious appeal. What is required is a cross-spectral appeal. So I think what is really happening in India today is a fight between what can be called the usurpation of a democratic majority argument by a majority community appeal on the one side, and the restoration of a republican equilibrium which says assemblies and parliaments need to be run by a democratic majority. But once that democratic majority is in office, India becomes a republic. The democracy of India has to safeguard the republic that is India. And the republic has to have place for everyone in it. A democratic leader who does not recognize his republican or her republican duties is not a leader of India. That person is a leader of a section. And even if that section happens to have, for the moment, a certain democratic mandate, that person is not going to be able to sustain it because India is at its heart republican.
So what you're saying that if Narendra Modi has to rule India for the next 10, 20 years as he hopes, either he has to change, and he has shown some signs of evolving from being a narrow Hindutva leader that maybe he was 15 years ago to today having a pan-Indian appeal. Once you become an elected leader in a diverse country like India, your politics will have to necessarily reflect that diversity.
And nobody showed that as brilliantly as Baba Saheb Ambedkar. He was regarded by everyone, and particularly by the Congress and very particularly by Gandhi, as an outstanding spokesman of Dalit India. But once he was chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution of the Constituent Assembly, he thought of the whole of India. The Constitution of India was not crafted by a Dalit leader. It was crafted by a person who had a Dalit perspective on India's history and on India's future. But he gave to India a republican constitution for everybody. That is what every chief minister and every prime minister in India has to do. The people of India are tired of politics. They are completely fed up of politicians. It is not old-style politics or new-style politics. Politics and politicians, and therefore leaders and leadership in India, are in great trouble. 4 years ago, there was such an extraordinary magnetic draw to Jantar Mantar when Anna Hazare and Arvind Kejriwal gave us an option. Now, there was a moment of disappointment, there was a phase of disappointment, but then it was overcome, and Arvind Kejriwal has again been given a lot of trust. Now, I don't know how he will shape in the future, but then he represents a kind of a counter to politics. Apart from Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, the term Neta and Netaji is today in great trouble. If I were to say, if I were to go to my old school or college, and as I often do, and I was to speak on leadership, if my college will tell me, Netagiri karo, Neta ban gayo, I think there cannot be a greater insult today than to be called a Neta or a leader in India.
But people at the end of the day are reluctant to become leaders in this country because politics is a closed shop. And is being an Arvind Kejriwal or a Kanhaiya Kumar really the answer? Or are they also in their own way anarchist leaders who actually, instead of offering a genuinely new leadership, are simply saying sab neta chor hai? And this danger is that as a result, all you are doing is preying on cynicism.
They represent and they reflect a reaction from India to conventional politics, which is also not very old, but which is fairly recent. The politics of money, the politics of power, and the politics basically of manipulation. And all these people could well turn out to be terrible disappointments. But nonetheless, they are also people who I believe have burnt themselves into the political imagination of India. Now, there was a time when Bhagat Singh was called an anarchist. There was a time when Gandhi was called an anarchist. He was called an anarchist by the conservatives and the conventional leaders of his time, of his early political time. And I'm not saying that these people are going to become Bhagat Singhs and Gandhis, but they certainly represent and reflect a fatigue in India today with politics. And they also represent something like a hope for the future of India to emerge from within politics. Because if they were anarchists, they would not have been in politics, they would have been in terrorism. Whereas they are actually in politics. They are in the politics of discussion. And I think there is great hope. Having said all that I have said, I am convinced that the people of India will convert their fatigue into a passion for change. And I think our state in Tamil Nadu is just waiting for somebody to emerge to tell the people of Tamil Nadu what is it that you are doing to yourselves. You have a future, you have a life, get a grip on your life.
Tamil Nadu for 49 years now has alternated between the DMK and the AIDMK. It's almost like Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I mean, let's be honest. These are the two parties that have ruled the country. Whereas you seem to genuinely believe there is space for alternative value-based politics and alternative value-based leaders. Do you really believe that?
We are in 2017. In 2027, Rajdeep, you will probably be talking to a person who would be chief minister or an alternative chief minister that day, who has not been heard of today. It may have come out of the DMK or of the AIADMK or from a completely new generation or new formation. But there will be that person, because chief ministers and prime ministers come and go. But the electorate stays, and the electoral vending machine stays. And that will throw up leaders who will protect the country from its own leadership.
I'm just wondering whether in this brand of politics, is there really any space, sir, for an ethical, decent person to actually enter politics and say, I actually represent all of you. I represent all Tamilians, or I represent all Indians. Is that really possible? Is it possible? I know you didn't like it when I sort of referred back to Mahatma, but is it really possible for someone to have that moral authority and come to the people of India with that moral authority and moral courage and say, I represent all Indians, sir?
Rajiv, I'll answer your question with two very quick points. One is that, and let me now fall for the bait. The use of the name Mahatma today is a use that many people turn to, including Mr. Narendra Modi, who has finally reduced the name and the image and the iconographic appeal of the Mahatma to the outline of his spectacles. But even in the new notes, he does need those spectacles. Why does he need those spectacles? To, in a way, elevate the new note because there is some room for and need for veracity, sheer veracity. I'll respond finally and secondly to what you said, Rajdeep. Yes, I believe there is a possibility for such a person to emerge, and I will now leave the stage of politics to the stage of what can be called public constitutional office in India. We have had 13 presidents. The present president is the 14th president. In terms of presidency, Rajendra Prasad had 2 offices, 2 terms, but he's the 13th president. But if you ask anyone who is not schooled in constitutional history to name one president of India, they are not going to say any name except Abdul Kalam. Why do they say Abdul Kalam? Because that man was not from politics. That man had a certain religion, he had a certain background, but he had no political background. And yet, from every part of India, every denomination of India, there was a surge of appreciation for Abdul Kalam. I believe, as a student of constitutional history, that there have been presidents who have been greater than Abdul Kalam. But there's been no president who has left that mark because he came with a freshness. He came with a non-sectarian appeal. He was somebody the country took to irrespective. He was a South Indian. He was a Muslim. He was a vegetarian Muslim, a veena-playing Muslim. He was a technologist, though some people called him a scientist, and he allowed that to go on. But he was an honest man. He was a man who has come into his office, and I do not see why a person who has not founded a party, who doesn't have a son or a grandson to carry on a family dynastic tradition, his picture is everywhere on auto backs, on walls. Abdul Kalam means something. For me, Abdul Kalam represents the prospect of a non-sectarian, non-political, non-polluted individual, giving India just that glimmer of hope that there is something in India still which cannot be manipulated.
I want you to fall maybe for one final bit. Both you and Rahul Gandhi share the same surname. I'm not sure what else you all share, probably very little. But you know, he is the grandson of Indira and the great-grandson of Jawaharlal Nehru, and you are the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. Rahul Gandhi has entered politics almost as if it is his right, and you and your family, most of your family members studiously have stayed away from electoral politics. Why do you believe that is so? Do you believe there in a sense also lies the flaw in our system, that the Congress system, the original Congress party, at some stage became a family party, and that in a sense has bred other families, smaller family businesses across this country? Why did you and your family members choose to stay away from politics while Nehru, Gandhi, or the family of Nehru chose to actively take over a political party?
I think that's a very unfair question, Rajdeep. Unfair to me and to also to many persons in my family who have seen what has happened to politics and to politicians. And probably I was just playing safe by not joining politics, whereas Rahul Gandhi has taken a huge risk by joining politics. But I would just like to say this, that I do not know the young man. I have no intention of taking his time because he's a very busy person. But I would still say this, that as a person who cannot speak for a particular community because he does not belong to any particular majority community or minority community, but he is as mixed up as a wonderful khichdi of India can be. But I would like him still to tell India something which nobody will ask him in the Congress party to do. If he were to stand up like Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator and say, I am expected to lead you to become Prime Minister of India. I am announcing today that I will not be Prime Minister of India. I do not want to be Prime Minister of India. I just want to serve the Congress, not because it was my mother's party, my grandmother's party, my father's party, but because it is a party which led India to freedom. I want to serve my party through my life and serve my country through my party. I am giving up all hopes and plans of becoming Prime Minister of India, but I want a Congress Prime Minister of India to emerge from the ranks of the party, from a person who you do not know now. I would say if that Rahul Gandhi were to emerge, I would say, Rahul, you are not my leader because you are far too young to be my leader. I'm now looking for somebody who is... But you are a hope, and I want you to say that.
You know, Gopal Gandhi, you put that very well. At the end of the day, I think in all that you said, we found a possible solution to the leadership crisis of this country. That we need the kind of leaders, in a sense, embodied by Abdul Kalam, the kind of values that, in a sense, he represented. Gopal Gandhi, as always, a pleasure, honor talking to you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Gopal Gandhi.